In this video, we're going to use Taiao to create a custom bonsai tree. We're going to use toPlant for the branching structures. We're going to use toLeaf to generate the leaves, and we'll use custom splines so that we can have a perfect shaping of our trunk. Okay, so here we are in Cinema 4D, and you can see I have my reference here, and this is the bonsai we're going to create. We have an empty scene, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually generate a spline that gives us the shape that we want to use for the trunk. So in the scene, I've got my reference image already set up in the background of my front view. So we're going to go into here and we'll get the spline tool. I'm going to set it to a B spline, and let's just start creating this shape. I'm not going to worry about points with this spline because I'm going to resample it using a Mesh Tools resample spline. So let's just get the general shape, something like this. Looks good. And then in 3D view, we can come in here and we can give it some dimensions because at the moment it's just flat. So I just tend to use something like the magnet and just tweak these. And the reason I've gone for the B spline is because you get a nice curve when you're doing something like this. The curves stay nice and clean. You don't have to adjust bezier handles. It's just a slightly easier method for creating a nice spline shape. Okay, that's looking all right. I think we'll just leave it there for this spline, and then what we're going to do quickly is go into INSYDIUM, Mesh Tools. We're going to get a spline sample, and the reason I'm using spline sample is just because I want a really even distribution of splines. And you can set it in the immediate points with the spline, but often you get a little bit of stretching, which I don't want. So I'm going to put this into the spline sample. You can see it creates this new spline, and all we want to do is adjust the count of the points here. So I'm going to set it to distance, which creates loads of points. We don't need that many. So let's go something like, we'll use 5. There's still a lot of points, but the distribution is nice and clean, and that will be helpful when we're adding detail into the trunk. Okay, so I'm going to make this editable, so just hit C, and that is going to be our trunk spline. And you don't need to, but it's already got a color. I like to have a bit of color. I'm going to hide it anyway, but I just like that for organization. Okay, let's go into Taiao. We're going to get the toPlant into the plant layers, and we're just going to drop down a trunk. Now, this bonsai is probably about 70 centimeters tall, but we'll just leave it at default because we can scale the whole thing down later. So we'll leave it at the default sizes. Let's drop our spline into the custom spline link, and you can see that's now giving us that shape. Okay, so we can hide that spline. I might like to make it a child so it's out the way, and then we can start working on this. Now let's look at the geometry under the hood. So we'll do NB to get our wireframe up and see what we're working with. That's not too bad. We might need a few more points on here because we're going to add modifiers to deform this mesh. We'll see how we get on. So let's just increase the ring segments so that it's a bit more even, like that, and we'll adjust the radius like that, and then this kind of goes in and out, bulges, and then it tapers down at the end there. So I'm going to do that taper. I'm going to add a point and add that taper on the end like so, and then we might create some random points and just bring some in and some out just to get a bit of bulbing happening, something like that. Obviously we're not going to make it exactly like the reference, we're just going to use that as a guide. Something like that looks pretty cool. Yep, happy with that. Right, so let's jump in and put some modifiers on here so we can get a bit more detail. So I'm going to hide the wireframe, go to modifiers, add a displacer. Then we want to use a noise, and that creates this deformation on the mesh here. So let's go into our noise and I'll just adjust the contrast a bit, something like that, and then we can increase this scale, something like that. Should look pretty cool. A bit more contrast in there. Okay, don't worry about these, we'll fix the little faceting errors. That's just in smoothing, and we could just add a subdivision to fix that. So let's go back to our plant. We'll fix that now. Just go up and add one subdivision. And you can see it cleans all that up nicely. Back to our plant layers, modifiers, and I'm going to add a twist. So we want this to twist around. Let's start making it look all gnarly. Something like that. So let's go 570. It's pretty cool. And obviously you can add as many of these modifiers as you want. So if we want another turbulence layer, let's just have a look at what that mesh is doing actually. Looks a bit... Okay, it's alright. If you want to add more, you can set some intermediate points as well. But you can see it increases it a lot. So let's turn the wireframe off. And you might not need to, but if you need more detail, add more points in there. I'm going to leave it as it was. And if you want another displace layer, you can do that. Add another layer of noises. So let's just bring this up so we can get our noise. Do something like dense, like that. And then you'd want to set the displacer to add, so it adds on top, and then I'm just going to bring that strength down. That's just adding an extra bit of randomness to this trunk, making it all gnarly and natural looking. So I'm happy with that. That looks pretty cool. We can leave that there as our trunk, and then what we'll do is we'll add our branching. So let's go in here and we'll add a branch. Now you can see it's gone a bit funny, and the reason it's gone funny is because it's got the branch on end, but what we've done with our trunk in the main tab is we've put our trunk endpoint right down so that it's closed off, which means the trunk on end, the branch on end is there, but it's so small and it's making it all go funny. So all we need to do to fix that is turn off the branch on end and go back to how it should be. So we've got our branches here. Let's say we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Let's go 7. 7 branches. We can adjust the distribution. Let's bring some of these guys up to the top and some of them down to the bottom. Something like that. We might need a few more branches to get this to work how we want it to, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this. In fact, I'm going to close that. Let's just keep it even. Let's get rid of those points. Bring them up. Okay, so main tab, let's angle these up. Add some variation in there. And add a couple more like that, and then with the angle let's just bring this down so that some of them are down and some of them are up, like so. Okay, and then we're going to put some turbulence on there. So into the modifiers tab we'll add turbulence, and let's just make sure the bias is off the end so that they're in the right place, and we'll come back to that. I just want to go back in here and add a bit more length to these, and also let's close that. Make them a bit thinner because they're not quite that, they're quite thin on the reference, aren't they? So we'll add some variation into everything. So that looks pretty good. Profile, let's bring that down. Something like that. So let's just go back to our noise. I'm just going to make it a bit smaller so they're a bit more gnarly, like that. And if you wanted, you could add some twist in there as well, so it sort of comes from the parent and twists on those branches as well, which if we get our wireframe, you can see that's twisting those as well. So let's just put that on full. Let's get rid of our wireframe. You can also put some displacement on these. Because they're really thin, it'll be quite extreme, so you're going to have to adjust the strength of these. Bring that noise down. Something like that, and then we can just adjust the strength so it's not quite so strong. Something like that is pretty cool. And then we want some sublateral branches. So with this one selected, we'll add more branches on the end, like that. With these ones, again, I'm going to turn off branch on end. And in the distribution, we want these further up the branch. So like this looks good. Let's go to the global settings and just drop this one down to 5, just to get a bit more detail in these branches. Plant layers, branch, main. Let's drop this down to 5 as well. And then we're going to angle these ones up, increase their length. Variation in the angle, drop down the point of them, and their radius as well, because they're quite thick. Still a bit too thick for this. They're quite thin and gangly on here. Okay, something like that. That's looking good. The rest of what we need to do is just using modifiers to adjust them. So go into modifiers. First thing we want is some gravity, because they are going up. So we're going to adjust the gravity in a negative, and you can go past the 100, so just keep pulling it up to get the where you want. Something like that. And then some variation. And then just add some turbulence onto these as well. So get the bias off the end. Adjust the scale of that. And play around with the seeds. That looks good. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. The next thing we need is our leaves. So let's turn off the plant. Go to INSYDIUM, toLeaf. So our leaf down here. So let's just go in on that. I'm going to get our wireframe back again so we can see what we're doing. Right, we want some more subdivisions. Let's say we'll go 12, leave it at 2, and then we'll add a subdivision here. We're going to add a bit of thickness as well, which creates some depth to the leaf. Let's just say 1. And then let's adjust our profile. These leaves fairly oval in shape. So let's just create that. So we're going to pull this down, create a point in the middle, stretch that out, and then just adjust the end knots to suit. Like that. Not that pointy. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so it's quite a simple shape. You can put a little bit of noise on these edges just to break it up from being perfectly even. Something like that. And then we'll go into our veins. We'll add a mid vein, and let's just drop that profile so it's thinner, like that. And then we'll add some lateral veins. Again, we'll bring the profile of those down, like so. And we'll bring our angle up. I'm going to put an offset in these as well, because they're not all perfectly aligned. So I'm just going to put some offset. And then get a few more in there. The angle is a bias here, so we can just drop that down as well. So that more angle at the top than there is at the bottom of the lateral veins. Something like that. Looks good. And then I'm just going to put a modifier to bend them slightly. So go to modifiers, and we want a bend. You can just adjust that bend, something like that. It's good. Okay, let's hide the wires. And what we want to do is just give it a little bit of folding and a little bit of furling. So modifiers, add a fold, drop the fold shape down to create a nice curve. Bring that out a little bit and fold that. Bring that out a bit more. Something like that. Let's bring it down from the tip of the leaf so that it's not folding right at the tip. Something like that. That looks good. Okay, then we'll add our furling. Strip that down like that. Okay, that's looking pretty good for our leaf. So let's set this up in the plant. So bring the plant back. The plant, we go select the last branch layer and add a leaf layer. With the leaf layer, go to geometry, change it to custom, and drop in our new leaf. So let's put the leaf as a child as well. And here we can start adjusting our leaf. So let's make it bigger. Like that. Let's just bring this out so we can see. Let's say we'll make it 5 with a variation of 10. That's good. And then go to orientation. We're going to angle them up. Put a little bit of variation in that. And let's get a couple more. Let's say there's 7 per branch. Or let's go 10. Something like that. Okay. So that's looking pretty cool. Quite happy with that for a really quick and easy bonsai. Let's look at putting a few materials on this. So we're going to jump into Redshift. We've got a layout here. And let's push the IPR to get it rendering. Right, let's make some materials for this. So first thing actually is get some lights in here. And we'll turn off the default light. So we go to Advanced, Redshift, Globals, and turn off the default light. So it's all going to go black in there in a second. And we'll add a Redshift dome light. And we'll get a material. Let's just put an HDR in there. So go to our browser. And let's just put something simple, room in there, just to get some light. That'll do. Cool. So we can close that. And let's just rotate that slightly, get a better view. Okay, that's cool. And I'm just going to get a Redshift camera so that we can set the background to override, and we'll leave it at black for now. Okay. Let's get our first material. So just click on material. Let's label this one trunk. And in here, I'm just going to add a normal and a texture map from one of the preset packs you can get from our website. Let's pipe that into the color, and let's put that in now. So we go to the trunk layer, materials, put our trunk in here, and you can see it's added that trunk. And all we need to do is just make sure the mapping works, and that seems to be setting the V to about 6. So it pops that down. Now, trunks are not massively reflective, so let's just bring that reflection down. And we have a normal here. So the normal is going to go into a bump. So we get a bump map. And before we do that, with the normal in the color space, we're going to click on that and type in raw. So we want it to be set to raw. Pipe that in there, and then bump into the bump. Obviously you can adjust the strength of that if you need to, but we'll leave it as it is. So back on our plant layers with this material, let's propagate it to all of the branches by clicking this icon here, and that means it's going to go on all of the branching layers as well. Okay, so for the next thing we want to do is we want to do the leaf, and we're going to create a material. So as Redshift, it's not a standard Redshift material, it's the one called material. The reason I'm going to use this one is because it has translucency. So let's get this one and we'll put this on our leaf, and then we can get a nice green. You could color sample this from the image as well if you wanted to. Something like that. That's good. We've got a nice green in there, and then with the material, if we look into the back face and translucency options, here we can set another green, but we want this one to be slightly brighter, or just not as green, because underneath leaves are not as green as the top of the leaves, something like that. And then we'll just add some translucency weight, and that really helps if we have something like sunlight. Let's add a sky rig. Really helps with the translucency from underneath. If we're looking underneath these leaves, so you can see the shadows being cast through, and the shadows from the veins and all that popping out, which looks really natural like that. That looks cool. So I'm happy with that. So there's our custom bonsai. We've got a custom spline, so if you wanted to adjust the spline to the shape of your trunk, you can do that. It's all fully procedural. Everything can be changed as you need.